They say that teamwork is what makes the dream work. But what happens if you're caught in a nightmare? Moonlight Pulse is a Metroidvania that released on April 26, 2024 for the price of $11.99 and can be found on Steam for both the PC and Mac platforms. It has you take control of different characters, making your way through a living environment, and I streamed the entire game over on Twitch. The question is, does it do enough to distinguish itself in the strong field of Metroidvanias that come out year after year? Or will it fall to the wayside as just another good game in a field of killers? Let's find out, shall we? So, Moonlight Pulse is basically a version of Osmosis Jones / Cells at Work, which I highly recommend both those forms of media, but with animals instead of pills and cell descriptions. The entire world is a living organism that has the troubles expected of a wild beast. More specifically, being inflicted with parasites and disease that's threatening to suck the life out of it. Luckily, there are the curative agents there to help fight off the parasites, such as Silix, a veteran mole who's the frontline fighter against the parasites, to Clyde, an engineer type who's a gopher that has been keeping everything running well for years and years, but now needs to be asked to be a little bit more hands-on in the protection. You'll play as 4 different characters over the course of the game, and that's where we'll start and focus on the gameplay. If you have played any other Metroidvanias, the formula here isn't that drastically different. The formula at its core is get an objective, you'll make your way around the map, and navigate the environment while killing creatures along the way. Mostly. The basics of Metroidvanias, of course, are here, including an in-game map and the ability to get lost. Each character has their own form of attack, which all vary in different distances and damage potential against the various creatures that you'll come across. For example, Charlotte does well when she's hitting enemies with the end of her whip, a la Castlevania, making her great for medium distances, but still able to function close. Meanwhile, Laguna is a long-distance shooter who wants to stay away from enemies, but has some functionality in being able to shoot up and be able to sort of trap enemies in a big bubble. In addition, each character also has different movement options that get upgraded throughout the game, such as becoming faster with sliding, being able to grab onto ledges, making temporary platforms, and gliding across the map. Switching through characters is as easy as the hit of a button. LB to go left if you're using an Xbox controller in terms of this bottom section of the screen of what the characters are, and RB to go right. Now, the weird thing is that in this game, for some reason I had this tendency to swap through characters a little bit too much, where for some reason I kept on getting confused by the order, even though it's on the bottom of the screen here. I don't hold that against the game. Sometimes I'm just dumb. The thing that the game definitely emphasizes gameplay-wise is the differences in each character along with their ability to succeed in the situation put in front of them. Some are obvious, especially in the early game with movement. You won't be able to get to certain places without the right person and their movement options. I mean, think of the Super Metroid, doors that have the super missile kind of locks on them. But some are ones that you'll learn as you play, especially in combat. Some characters have elemental weaknesses against certain enemies, but some are just better designed in handling different enemies due to those enemies' strengths. And one of the biggest jobs in this game is managing your group's health between the different characters so that all of them can succeed. Sure, Silix is probably the hardest hitter of the group, but if you keep on using him in combat, especially in the ones that he doesn't do so well in, and he keeps on taking damage, when you truly need his abilities, you may find him being low on health, and everybody else is doing great, and you'll try to work with them in suboptimal situations. You have to try to balance your team in its effectiveness, especially in the latter part of the game, when you get all 4 characters to play with at one time. Granted, there is a protection system of sorts here where a buddy of yours will swap in if an active character takes fatal damage, with this here, but you only get a certain amount of those before a save point, and considering that most healing options are the save points themselves, there are some badges and things that will heal you, you can run out of them very quickly if your team is low on health and you're not using those extra health options. The thing is, the combat here is very simple at the surface, but the developer does do as much as he can to vary things with level and enemy design. There's a good pace of new situations and tweaks to the formula, with raised barriers and spots of enemy spawns that forces you to change tactics at times. For example, early game, you may think that there's no reason not to use Laguna all the time, considering A, he's a ranged option against most enemies that can't really do a lot to him, and B, he does do a little bit less damage than somebody like Silix, but he's a lot safer. And in general, that can seem the case. But as the game progresses, the game will start putting enemies in places that expose Laguna to danger a little bit more effectively, and forcing you to really think about your options with the rest of your team. But with that said, general combat can also start to weigh the game down at times, especially if you are backtracking into old areas and are forced to go through enemies that you really don't want to fight again. The game does have these certain enemies that are just annoying to fight, especially in situations where you have a low health character that you're protecting. These floating rock meatballs are a prime example of it. They're a lot easier to deal with Laguna, but if he's low on health, most of the others are probably going to take damage while trying to deal with him. Now, didn't I just say that was part of the strength of the game? Well, yes, that certain situations are better with certain characters, but it was also the annoyance factor, where the fact is, it wasn't necessarily skill-driven in terms of dealing with some of these other characters. It was more timing of just slowing things down in terms of movement and getting through an area. It felt like the game was getting sloggy in terms of certain parts, which was exasperated with something I will mention later in the review. Boss fights are good for the most part, even if they aren't that numerous. Although there is one that, in retrospect, I liked and also hated. I don't want to spoil the fight per se, but let me just say that the fights back and forth and events are cool. But if one of the dev team wasn't in the chat at the time when I was fighting it, I might not have known what to do before getting really frustrated with it. Now, Metroidvania gameplay isn't just combat, it's exploration and moving about the environment. And here's where the game can shine brightly, and also stumble into a mud puddle. Moving about the environment in the early game can feel a little slow at times, but it never felt too cumbersome, especially when running across an area where you couldn't get into. It was reasonably obvious that you couldn't. Where it does really shine, however, is where the movement tests your execution of those movement options in puzzle-like ways, like understanding how your abilities to make it across a hazard, like using the bubble power Laguna here to move through the acid, despite it ticking away and possibly hurting you in a small amount of time. The game gives you these aha moments like this and can feel pretty fantastic when you figure it out, even if you take 25 minutes to understand that I need to glide with Charlotte here, despite the fact I tried pretty much everything else. And I actually really don't understand how the physics works in this solution. Never mind. For the most part, it's good. Where the game stumbles, however, is in the backtracking and objective finding, especially of locations that you've already visited. In most games like this, you'll get a marker that can reasonably tell you where a certain landmark or room is compared to the rest of the environment. They may label the room even. That's not the case here, and can be frustrating when you're trying to remember where the museum is to return certain log elements and you just don't remember which square on this map it is. In addition, one of the key features of the environment are these sort of blood-like veins that can move you around the map. Sure, they can make things easier as you open up certain blood clots to extend it, but trying to figure out where you can exactly go and where you need to stop felt like you needed a TripAdvisor to figure it out for you, because quite frankly, it was a little bit painful at times. There's also just this oomph factor that unfortunately Moonlight Pulse for the most part doesn't have when it comes to the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, there are fun moments in the story and you'll enjoy yourself, and boss battles can have great moments in it, but the overall gameplay is just missing that real standout element, that real oomph that puts it over the edge, even with things like the character switching. It's solid, but it's also a game that I don't necessarily want to go back and replay when it comes to the gameplay portion of it. It just doesn't have that snappiness or that sort of je ne sais quoi that games like Hollow Knight or other games like, for example, Tevi had. Moving on. The game's presentation, in conjunction with its solid story and environmental presence, is rather well done here, even if I'm absolutely dumb and can't recognize certain anthropomorphic animals if my life depended on it. Don't ask me what Charlotte is. The fact is that I still get comments on my Game Design Freedom Planet video for calling Milia a rabbit as opposed to the dog that she is. Yeah, I know. The game's visual style is straightforward and has a variety of different environments that are simple yet easy to read, with good detail in the background that adds life to the living organism in a good amount of cases. Granted, that can get confusing when you get to the top of the world, where you're wondering what exactly are the mountains that are in the distance. I mean, you're on an organism, is those real mountains? Are you on a back of like a turtle or something? Actually, that's sort of the weird part about the environment as a whole. There are definitely parts that work rather well for the inside an organism environment, like the blood tubes and this section with the tentacles here. But then there's sections that are more generic, like this lava area, and the game does give an explanation for it, I think, but it still doesn't feel right regardless. Now, the colors and the designs of the creatures are rather nice, and I do like how the game does try to keep areas in color themes for the most part. I do like the basic yet readable designs of the characters here. They give them good personality traits, especially in their character portraits. You can understand what this character is just by looking at them. I will also give the game some props regarding the animation work here. Some of the bosses and the attacks they pull are actually rather striking, like actually biting into the world itself, and everything on your character's side was clean and crisp from an animation standpoint. I could actually watch Laguna just slide along the world all day long and somehow not get bored. Is it incredibly intricate at all times in terms of animation? No, but it does what it should. Goes along with the action of both platforming and combat naturally, while still being fun to look at and watch over the course of a game. In terms of sound, this is where the game may lack a little bit in my opinion, and this has to do with the mixing and sound levels more than the quality of the sounds themselves, along with what seem to be sound effects that I would expect to be there that weren't. Like, when I listen to the quality of the sounds, I take a step back and I don't think about the volume level compared to everything else. They are mostly good. The bubbling of Laguna, for example, against the ground has that pop that I would expect for that kind of ability. But when I take the volume into account, it's faint and doesn't try to be overly loud, but at the same time, it can be a struggle to hear even when playing the sound back and listening for it. Meanwhile, you can clearly hear the hit sounds of hitting enemies that sound like a truck compared to those other sounds. And yes, they should sound a little bit higher, but maybe not at the mixing rate in terms of the sound levels compared to each other. This also goes for you getting hit. I feel like you getting hit should be something that's emphasized. The fact is, you took damage. It should be something that really sounds out compared to everything else, and it feels like it's on the same level as like the bubble or some of the more minor effects. Granted, maybe I'm looking into this a little bit too closely, but take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about. As for the music, I mean, here's the thing. It is going up against heavy hitters in the Metroidvania genre. The music here is fine. It does the job to put on the exploration, to put on the mystery as you're walking around, and to get the action up when the combat is going. But otherwise, I won't listen to this music outside the game. It's just not that great when it comes to the beat. Just take a listen and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the story, which does have some depth to it, even if it may not be the primary focus. The story really revolves around the curative agents, but I find the primary character here to be Laguna, the one who isn't an agent at the start and ends up becoming one over the course of the game. He's sort of the heart of the team as it goes forward, even helping the veterans with the right words at the right time. But each member has a good distinct personality in the limited capacity that you get them at. It's not like they're talking all the time, they talk in specific scenes and when you interact with people in the environment, but there's a good amount of content here for what's here. One thing I will mention is that each character has a reaction to NPCs in the environment, aka switching between characters will get you different answers. So keep that in mind if you're playing the game. I didn't really realize that until someone in the Twitch chat told me, and it does help in adding to the characters and building out their personalities. Quite frankly, I want to see more of this team, and see a little bit more of their stories together. The plot itself really does focus on the big bad Parasite and what he's trying to do to kill the world, and from that aspect, it somewhat makes sense. Although I keep on using the term parasite, and last time I checked, they still want to take life from the creature that they're infecting. They don't necessarily want to kill them per se, but I digress. The story and the events have a few twists that you could probably see coming in some ways, but there are twists that you don't expect that sort of do make sense in retrospect and surprised me in a lot of ways. Now, is this writing necessarily the cream of the crop when it comes to Metroidvanias? No, not at all. It's probably right in the middle. But it does have a unique element with the teamwork aspect, and there's a lot to build off here in terms of future games. So, I did enjoy it. I ended up wanting to see more of it. So, what's my final thoughts on Moonlight Pulse? Well, here's the dilemma. Did I enjoy my time with Moonlight Pulse? Absolutely. There's some great platforming and puzzle elements. The combat is okay, and the gameplay, while having some bumps, especially in backtracking, still works and I enjoyed it. Sure, I have complaints about the presentation and wanted more story in the end, but it still worked rather well, and it made me want to complete the game on Twitch. I wanted to see the ending. But remember, my score is a buyability score, and the problem that Moonlight Pulse runs into is that there's a deadly gauntlet of Metroidvanias that have released in the past few years when it comes to quality, let alone the past year. You've got games like Animal Well, Biomorph, Afterimage, Lycia, Age Through Blood, Tevi. Tevi was one of my favorite games last year. All these within the last year, and quite frankly, many of those games have those really unique elements that really make them stand apart from the competition and make you want to buy them in particular. While the teamwork aspect and changing in and out is nice, it doesn't do enough to make the game really that unique, considering that you're just sort of switching between different characters in terms of different styles. You're just playing different forms of Metroidvania. Sure, there are times that comes in handy or does sort of synergize with itself, but those other games are probably ones I'd recommend before buying Moonlight Pulse, despite the fact that it's still a good game. That's why the game gets a 74 out of 100. It's a buy for those who really like the niche of Metroidvania and want to play something right now. But for a majority of people, you'll probably want to look at other games or pick it up on sale when it does go on sale. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match the game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to your main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Now, there are some adjustments here in terms of the type of content you're looking for. This is a little bit more what I would call a laid-back Metroidvania, and it does have some elements that I think would be reasonable for kids. Well, mostly. Those who have played the game probably know what I'm talking about in terms of what I'm sort of pausing on. Anyway, that is it for this review. Thank you for getting this far into the review and, well, listening to me ramble for 21 minutes. If you like this video, hit that like button and maybe share the review with a friend. And if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. As to what is going to be happening next on the channel, well, you're not going to get content for at least 2 weeks. Probably. The thing is that I am going on vacation. It's been a while since I've gone on vacation, and I am visiting family up north. There's a lot going on, and quite frankly, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with them, probably helping them out, but also trying to relax. So when the next review is, I have no idea. But I will also inform you all that as of right now, I will be joining in a series of live streams that will be benefiting Doctors Without Borders. I will get you more information as it comes up, but basically I was asked to be a part of it, and that's a kind of organization that I would love to give my time to in terms of, trying to get donations. It will be doctor-themed games that I'll be streaming, and I'll let you know more as the date approaches. Anyway, that's it for now. And as always, if you want to hear more about what I'm planning or what I'm looking at right now, join the Discord in the link below. And as always, keep on gaming.